Welcome everybody. We are here today with Zoltan Istvan, the Transhumanist Party candidate to become President of the United States in 2016, and also with a couple of co-founders of the UK Transhumanist Party and people who have been looking indeed at Transhumanist Party opportunities throughout Europe. To say a few words at the beginning to set context, I'd like to introduce the session. I'd like to introduce the session, which is question answer with Zoltan Istvan, who many of you will know from his best-selling book, The Transhumanist Wager, which is certainly a book you will not forget reading. It is full of very powerful ideas. Zoltan has also proved himself to be a remarkable writer of short-form articles as well, in Huffington Post and Psychology Today, and many other media outlets. He has persistently brought interesting ideas into the public mind with a transhumanist angle. And most recently, as I said, he has announced himself in October of last year as being the founder of something called the Transhumanist Party and a candidate for the US president. In case anybody's wandered in here and not quite sure what transhumanism is all about, there's one definition which is in the draft political manifesto from UK Humanity Plus. Transhumanism is the viewpoint that human society should embrace, wisely, thoughtfully, and compassionately, the radical transformational potential of technology. In other words, that human society can be significantly, profoundly transformed. Some people say transcended, which means going beyond its previous limits as a result of technology. Just to say a few things about technology. There's this quote which I like from the eminent physicist Freeman Dyson, who says that technology is the mother of civilizations, of arts, and of sciences. And I think transhumanists would add to that and say the new technology of the near future is going to be the mother of new kinds, new levels of civilization, new dimensions of arts, and whole new aspects of science. The MIT economist and academic Andrew McAfee also speaks in similar lines when he says that history teaches us that nothing changes the world like technology. You can read his article on a recent blog he wrote for the London Financial Times. He went on to say that for thousands of years, until the middle of the 18th century, there were only glacial rates, rather slow rates of population growth, economic expansion, and social development. And then, in the middle of the 18th century, we had the Industrial Revolution. And as Andrew McAfee goes on to say, the Industrial Revolution happened, centered initially around James Watt's improvements to the steam engine and humanity's trajectory in any of the metrics we mentioned earlier, population, economic expansion, social development. They've all bent sharply and permanently upwards. And just to finish this quote, great wars and empires, despots and democrats. That's the kinds of things we usually hear about in history books. But all of these things, including the insights of science and the revelations of religion, none of them transformed lives and civilizations as much as a few practical inventions. And we transhumanists wish to enable some more important practical inventions to take place in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But there's more to technology than technology. I've got another quote here on this introductory session from the eminent business writer, management guru, Peter Drucker, who says that we are becoming aware that the major questions regarding technology are not technical, but human questions. And we've taken this notion to heart in that draft of the Transhumanist Political Manifesto produced by UK Humanity Plus. It says, almost at its very beginning, that the speed and direction of technological adoption can be strongly influenced by social and psychological factors, by legislation, by subsidies, and by the provision or restriction of public funding. So human issues of all sorts, and all of them can be impacted, for better or for worse, by political action. And that's been my own view for many years, and that's why I was so pleased when Zoltan brought his attention to the political sphere. So that brings me to open the discussion proper by asking Zoltan, and we'll switch the screen back to Zoltan, what is your thinking behind creating the Transhumanist Party? So over to you, Zoltan Istvan. Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you, David. And those were some awesome quotes. I really enjoyed listening to them. And for the viewers that's listening, I have a bit of the flu, so if you catch me coughing or my voice sounds funny, I'm just a little bit underneath the weather. But you know, the original reason I created the Transhumanist Party has to do with the idea that you really can't get that much done in society and in the world unless you are somehow aiming in a political means. And, you know, we've set up societies such that basically there are states or there are governments that are overseeing everything, and often if they don't allow something, then they don't allow it and doesn't really either exist or become popular. And transhumanism is one of those things that we're going to be up against a lot of resistance against some of the radical technology, you know, uploading our consciousness or using robotic hearts or whatever it is. I mean, there's tons of technologies out there that are going to be controversial. The idea is a political party will enable society to see transhumanism as also something that has a political mindset. It's not just a bunch of scientists. It's also a regular form, a regular course of society that's trying to make a overall push, make the movement broader in order to enable these technologies and this progress to occur. Because we can all be honest, there's a chance that some people may not want transhumanism, and if they're in power and they say no, then there's really that much we can do about it. So the Transhumanist Party was created to include a political framework for transhumanism in the world, in society, so that people wouldn't say, well, what are their political views or what are their ideologies? We'd have a kind of a basis for that covered. And seeing that the transhumanism movement didn't have a real political angle, I took it upon myself to create the United States Transhumanist Party. And so far we have absolutely hit a nerve in the media, and it's incredible how much interest there is in transhumanism just through the political angle of the Transhumanist Party. And I am totally encouraged by the fact that so many other international parties are now being created. I think together we can make a very strong united front to push transhumanism into mainstream consciousness so that people think it and know it, and anytime they see a technology that's out there, they'll say, wow, that sounds like something transhuman.
Thanks. Now, Amon, I'd like to bring you in here. And Amon Twyman, as I mentioned at the beginning, is one of the co-founders of the UK Transhumanist Party and is also active in an alliance and collaboration of European transhumanist parties. And all of these have sprung into existence in, the last two weeks or so, yeah, which is echoing Zoltan's point that this seems to have hit a nerve. So just maybe bring viewers up to date as to what has happened in the last 2 weeks and give your reactions to what Zoltan's been saying.
Well, I might, just to give the context, I might go back a little bit further and just think about what I was thinking about the Transhumanist Party only a month ago. Because on a certain level, I feel like a little bit of a fool. I've done a complete U-turn. I've always respected what Zoltan says and does, and I don't agree with him on absolutely every point, but I just love the way Zoltan's been going about things. And then he came up with the Transhumanist Party. And I had mixed feelings myself, just because on the one hand I've always thought a political dimension was really important, but I thought there is no way you're going to get a unified political vision from transhumanists. So it's, who've got so many different ideas and points of view and so on. But then it was just in that Christmas week that you and I had been speaking, and several others of us had been speaking, and it just suddenly seemed that this was going to happen no matter what, and sometimes you just have to push ahead and do what you can. I mean, it seemed to me that after Zoltan had opened the floodgates, this is something that was going to happen, regardless of whether we did it or if somebody else did it. And so it seemed a really good idea to try to go ahead and try to represent transhumanism as well as we could. I mean, it's the early days. It's the other thing, the other conversation's been going around, that there are different ways of doing these things. I think there's a long game, which is where, like, the idea of Zoltan becoming president, as much as it would be remarkable, I don't actually expect Zoltan to become president in 2016. But that said, you've got to start the ball rolling, haven't you? So, I mean, if we didn't start doing these things now, 25 years from now, we'd look back and think, well, if only we started a couple of decades ago, we might have had enough run up to be able to be getting things done a couple of decades from now. So, we're getting the ball rolling. And of course, there's more sensible political activity that involves connecting with other parties and trying to have influence in other ways. But the one thing I would say I completely agree with is that there are a lot of opponents to transhumanism who've been taking it more and more seriously over the last 20 years. And, they were laughing about it or ignoring it 20 years ago. Nowadays, there are a lot of people who take it pretty seriously, don't like it, but they haven't got to the point of opposing us in an organized way. And we can't afford to get to the point where our opponents have gotten organized politically, but we haven't, because then they can just shut us down. Just all the key transhumanist initiatives, we wouldn't have any traction at all. So I'd just say that as much as the mix of ideas is inevitably going to be a little different in Europe than it is in the US, I just think this is a fantastic initiative and want to throw everything I've got into it. I think Zoltan's done a great thing here.
Great. So let's come to that point of the mix of interests and the different priorities. So the next question I would like to put to Zoltan, we've discussed the thinking behind creating the party. The next question is going to be this, which I'll ask you to answer in a minute. Well, what are your priorities and which areas are you most interested in? Is it defense? Is it changing medicine? Is it legislation about making innovation easier and so forth? But before you answer that, I do have one comment for the whole of the audience, because I'm very pleased to say we have a lot of people already viewing. And we will be feeding questions from the audience into this discussion shortly. And the way that it's best to do that is if you have a screen that looks something like this. This is a screenshot I did earlier. And if you've got showcase down the right-hand side, you can actually change it from being showcase. If you find that small little grid of buttons, I'm assuming you're watching this on a desktop or a laptop, if you can get that little 3x3 square of buttons and click on that, that will allow you to change from showcase to Q&A. And then when I took this picture earlier, there were no questions posted, but there already are a number of questions appearing in that box. And the ones that get the most +1s are the ones that we're more likely to be looking at. So anyway, whilst the audience is putting more questions in, hopefully you'll be listening to Zoltan as well, because Zoltan, back to you. What are the priority policy areas that are most important to the Transhumanist Party?
Well, and I think what's interesting here and what's probably best is that each transhumanist party to each country probably develops their own set. Well, it's nice to have a united front. I think Amon hit on something really important, which is there is a lot of disagreement in the community amongst politics and stuff like that. But that shouldn't stop us from forming political parties to try to maximize the effect of transhumanism in the world, even if some of those ideas are different. Now, I made a point to very much distance myself from both the ideas in my novel and some of my even more controversial articles, in hopes that a more moderate and kind of centric United States Transhumanist Party would appeal to a much larger populace. So I have created, essentially 3 guidelines or 3 aims that are very basic, and I think most transhumanists would agree with. And the first one is that we want to, and this is personally also my most important goal, which is why I wrote my novel and why I'm in this field to begin with, is that I would like to put a lot more resources into the field of life extension science. I simply don't like the idea that we come to this planet and that we have to leave it somehow because of death. I think we could use science and technology to overcome that. And I think if we could divert resources that we're using for other things in the United States government, we could put a huge amount of money, maybe $1 trillion, into life extension science, and we could have some real results here in probably less than a decade. Second is just to try to spread transhumanism. One thing we have, especially in America, and you don't have so much in in Europe, is that we have a pretty broad religious populace that's somewhat fundamental in its outlook. And the idea of living indefinitely, or the idea of putting on robotic arms, or significantly changing the human species and the human experience does not really bode well with them. So, one of the goals of the Transhumanist Party is to try to convince them that it's not in opposition to their viewpoints. It's just something that can make their lives better and longer. It's not going to necessarily take away their religious orientation or viewpoint. It's just simply going to add to their well-being and to their health. So, you know, we want to spread transhumanism into the populace, into the mainstream culture, and get people to embrace it and not see it as some type of opposing feature. And of course, third is I'm also worried about the technology. If we're not careful, transhumanism could become our nightmare. So it's up to transhumanists in many ways to make sure that this technology that we're celebrating, that we're parading, also doesn't come back to bite us. So it needs some type of regulation, some type of oversight, and much philosophical discussion in the kind of thing we're doing right now to, you know, bring it to the kind of popular culture in a way that's manageable, rational, and also doesn't scare everyone. And so, you know, I want to make sure that some of the more difficult challenges that this technology will bring, for example, chip implants, if everyone had it, you know, there's so many surveillance issues and stuff like that. How does a party or how does a movement actually deal with that? And so we'd like to create policies that address those issues. They're not necessarily pro or against, but just addressing issues that might ultimately be favorable for the public at large. And also, you know, I say of all the three goals I've just listed, they're all very important, but I'm under no illusion that I'm going to win the United States presidency. That was never a realistic goal. The idea, though, is that by having a kind of a character that might have some, you know, be able to get there in front of the media and talk about this stuff, we're able to elevate the field of transhumanism to another level. And, you know, people like to see, I guess, charisma and stuff like that. So they need to see somebody that is actually representing. And so it's one of the reasons why I've actually kind of put myself out there to try to do this, and knowing very well that, you know, there's almost 0.000% chance that I would win the presidency in 2016. But there is a chance by 2024 the Transhumanist Party might be a very strong political entity, something in the field of the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, where if America ever does choose to go to a third party, we might be that one in 5-10 years. So that's another main thing that I'm trying to do with the entire Transhumanist Party. And I'd say the most important goal, though, that I really am hoping to do between now and 2016 is to influence other politicians. And I think with a lot of my media attention, I'm going to be able to get the ear of Hillary Clinton. I'm going to be able to get the ear of some of the Libertarian Party leaders, and I'm going to be able to get the ear of some of the conservatives, and they're going to have to listen and consider it and say, well, does the transhumanist community represent a realistic voting base? Is it something I should appeal to? Is it something I should fight against? But whatever happens, I'm going to do my best to influence the major politicians who can win it. And that could be something very powerful indeed, because if they, for example, start incorporating transhumanism either in their language, in their speeches, or even anything like that, then we have made some success in pushing the movement forward, and also in getting the populace as a whole to think, wow, you know, the future is really coming. It's not science fiction anymore. Maybe we ought to spend some time developing policy around some of this radical technology that's already here and certainly on its way.
That's great, Zoltan. Now, because this party is very new, almost certainly you haven't had a chance to work out policy for all different areas, but there is one topic that comes up quite often, and I'm selecting this now from the list of questions that audience members have put in. It's a question raised by Frank Rummel. It's also been raised by Adam Page in a previous discussion before the meeting got started, and he asks about guaranteed minimum income, also known as universal basic income or sometimes basic income guarantee, because the view is that as technology advances, more and more automation will take place and more people will be displaced from the labor market. Is this an issue that you see as important?
Yeah, so, you know, this is a tough question because I have been planning to write an extensive article on this. And over the last few months, if some people have been following my interviews, they know that I have been leaning towards the universal basic income, towards supporting it. The problem is that I don't really know, at least publicly right now, don't know all the caveats about it and if it would be a straight universal basic income or something like that. But you can know that I do plan to write an article that is at least, I think, favorable for the universal basic income for my presidential candidacy, and also probably to, discussing this with the officers of the Transhumanist Party, but probably to push forward something like that as a party policy. The issue, though, at hand is that I don't know all the different angles of it, and I have to speak with a few more economists and advisors as I try to decide if we alienate more people by doing something. But no matter what happens, it's pretty clear that with automation and robots taking people's jobs, something's going to have to happen in 20 years, or we're going to have essentially a revolution on our hands when nobody has any kind of jobs or money. And so essentially, something has to take place, like the universal basic income, in order to make sure that people don't get really upset with their lives. And this kind of relates also to the article I wrote on trying to make college mandatory. I'll be pushing a policy like that, but it'll be much more gentle, not like necessarily mandatory, but try to make it free, try to make it so that people can go through an entire long educational process and find cultural value, perhaps spiritual value, perhaps just creativity value in their lives, even if they no longer are working at some point 20, 30 years in the future. It's imperative that we don't have a trinket culture where people just want to buy little things all day at Walmart. Instead, they want to create things, whatever that creation is, whatever their passion is. And so, one of the goals of the Transhumanist Party, and this is a bit utopian, but is to try to create a society of people that really are innovators. And it's not necessarily innovators for money. It could be innovation in any type of sense that they want. It could even be spirituality. It could be art. It could be all these things. As we progress forward, we're going to have probably more time once jobs are taken. And I just talked to my wife about this. Even her job as an OBGYN will eventually be taken. There will be robots that will be able to deliver babies better and safer than human beings. It's just a matter of time. So, what does one do? So, yes, we are probably going to come out and support the universal basic income. I don't know if it's going to be a straight support, but I do like so far what I've read and what I've seen, and that's about the best I can give you on that right now.
Because the interesting thing is that politicians from various different directions, whether they would be classified as left-wing and right-wing, and I know these terms are often incomplete and not very helpful, but politicians from different backgrounds do seem to be interested in this, whether it's positioned as negative income tax or as a basic income. And Amon, I wonder if you have any advice that you would offer aspiring transhumanist politicians of any parties or countries on this topic of guaranteed minimum income. Is it something you see as important?
Well, I personally think it's very important, but there are two thoughts here. The first is, and Zoltan touched on them both in his way. The first is there's sort of the question of party mechanics. How's the party going to work these things out? Zoltan's saying he's going to have to talk to advisors and so on. As I mentioned, with the European parties, it looks like we're talking about playing a long game, which means we have to work out how we're going to decide official policy, taking into account the points of view of lots of different people. But UBI, basic income, is a strong recurrent theme. It's looking really likely that that's going to be a common platform for the European parties, I would say. You get a spread, then you get people who want to go further. I noticed in some of the questions there's mentions of idea like resource-based economy and so on. There's a whole spread of ideas here that, like I say, we've got to look at what the Transhumanist Party could realistically advocate for that would kind of create a bridge to more utopian scenarios. My own philosophy, I'm a techno progressive or social futurist, so I think that there are two halves to the equation. One is pushing forward the technology, and the other is helping the community, not leaving people behind in the rush to push forward the technology. So I think initiatives like universal income coming along to deal with massive automation, I think that's critical. And as Zoltan says, if we don't have something like that, we're going to have a revolution. But there is a lot to work out. I mean, you know, Zoltan's been doing this publicly for, what, not even 4 months. We've been doing it for only 2 weeks. And we can't just kind of by fiat say, yes, we're going to do this, and then automatically alienate everyone who disagrees. So it's going to take a little while to, at the very least, work out processes by which we can decide our policies fairly and officially. But yeah, me personally, if I could just swing the gavel and say this is what we're going to do, I'd be very strongly in favour of universal basic income, definitely. I mean, you know, again, there's details in different countries. The calculations are different for different countries. What will be accepted by different populations is different. So there's a lot to think about.
Great. Zoltan, if I come back to your number one priority, which you mentioned is the science and technology to accelerate longevity, and you said that if we could find a budget of about $1 trillion, we might, in perhaps less than a decade, be able to significantly extend human longevity and possibly even allow us indefinite healthy longevity. But where is this $1 trillion going to come from? And politicians are great, especially if they're not in power. They're great saying they're going to spend more money. Where do you expect that budget can be found?
So, you know, there are a number of ways to do this. In my opinion, the idea that I have been pushing is I have, you know, at 40 years of age, 41 years of age, have seen America involved in so many wars, far off wars, wars that some wars that I've even covered as a journalist. I don't see a need for all that all the time. I sometimes have understood the political agenda, and other times I thought, this is crazy. We do not belong there. We should not be there. So when you actually work out the amount of money that America spends on defense and on wars, it's literally trillions a year. It's about 20% of the American budget. If you just took a few percentage of that and put that into science and medicine, which literally gets 10 times less than the defense budget in the United States, it gets about 2%. And of course, that's not life extension science. Life extension science is 0.0001 of that 2%. But if you took the 20% defense budget and took a few percentage points off it and put it towards, cancer, some of the other, diabetes, and basically reversing aging, you would probably very quickly, you would literally, first off, you would have not just quadrupled, you would have made it maybe, a few thousand% more than the resources going in. You could create literally universities and facilities, institutions that are dedicated specifically to reversing aging, dedicated to making people live better and longer with that kind of money. It would be an initiative sort of like you had said, the moonshot stuff, where you really make a concentrated effort on a goal, and you say in 10 years' time, we're going to make it so that we can stop aging. And maybe you make it or maybe you don't. But if you put the money there and you start the ball rolling down that that direction, you will get those results. And it doesn't take that much. It's not like I'm saying let's strip the United States Army and defense, to nothing. That's not it at all. I'm talking about a few percentage points. But with that money, you could change the nature of aging in the human species. And that's where I would be getting the money first and foremost from.
And there's a longevity dividend that many researchers have talked about, a bit like the peace dividend. When we were no longer at war, in principle, there's money to be spent on other things, the peace. Similarly, if we can avoid the huge healthcare costs of people in the last few years of life, which is often extremely expensive, if we can even put that back by 5 or 10 years by improving the quality of life when people would previously have been falling sick, then that liberates a lot of funding to be spent on other things. So I'm very much with you there. But the next question I'd like to come to, I'm going to follow the questions which have got the highest number of votes. So if you're watching this and you just dialed in, please find the Q&A app and you can join in the discussion there. The next highest voted question is one that talks about the politics within the transhumanist movement. And Zoltan, I know in your own book, The Transhumanist Wager, you have, shall we say, mixed things to say about the way in which a transhumanist traditional organization has been, effective or ineffective. And the actual question that Alexander Karen asks is, do you have any advice on how to stop the transhumanist movement from self-sabotaging, from being split in fragments and failing to unite and spending more time quarreling rather than actually uniting and getting things done in a cohesive way?
Well, that's a very tough question, and one of the reasons I was happy to really do this hangout is to kind of discuss a little bit about that. I think everybody is pretty disappointed with how things go on Facebook and the major communities in transhumanism, how there's so much kind of bitter fighting and bad comments, and I think a lot of us spend time there, and it feels it doesn't feel nice. I come off Facebook a lot and some of the other social media, and I just thought, it's impossible to unite people. Everyone is sort of pushing their own agenda and not actually getting anywhere. So I think one thing that people have to realize, though, with what I just said, is that the community of transhumanists, especially on Facebook, shouldn't be taken as the community of transhumanists in the world. Facebook is just a few thousand people with a few hundred members who are very active and very aggressive and say things that they want to say, and some of them are young, some of them have perhaps, sit in front of their computers all day. It's not necessarily a realistic scenario of what is happening with the movement. The movement, the realistic scenario, is sort of how I think a lot of these transhumanist parties have popped up in some kind of viral way, or how much media attention transhumanism is getting. Or even, as I just saw this the other day on the Wheel of Fortune, somebody said, he won the Wheel of Fortune, his name is Alex, and he said, well, I'm a transhumanist. It's popping up more and more, and that's really where the community and the movement, I think, is found strongest, is not in the Facebook groups or in the social media groups, but in the fact that it is growing outside of it, and that I do believe there are probably millions of advocates for it now, and certainly many millions have heard the word. I think some of my articles went so far last year. The Ectogenesis article was picked up by probably 50 major newspapers around the world. It was even 5 or 6 of them in China, and those 5 or 6 are actually larger than the New York Times. So we're talking huge amounts of people have now heard about it. So, and I think a lot of people end up supporting it or saying that's cool. So I think the movement itself should not be determined by something that's on social media, where there's some long-standing 20-year members, and then there's some new people, just out of high school, or who have just come on and they're very aggressive and they want to start a group, and these are small groups. We're talking about media hitting millions and millions of people. That's really where the core and the power of the movement is. So when you hear a lot of bickering, I don't think it's necessarily the real feeling of the movement itself. No, it might be the feeling of the community in social media, but I think it's too small to actually make a bit of a difference. And more I am paying less attention to social media and more to major media as I see these things go broadly and understand how press is starting to deal with it, and how other people, outside of it are starting to talk about it. And that's where I think the community is really developing. And it's not necessarily community, but it's a cultural mindset that transhumanism is becoming part of the culture. And that's what I'm really encouraged about. So I, when it comes to all the bickering, and going back to the original question, I'm not fond of it, but I think it's actually just a very small aspect of where the movement is going, where the movement is. And it's probably not nearly as important as a lot of the people who leave some of these meme messages think it is. It's just a few hundred people or a few thousand people at most.
Okay, so let's move then from a question about some of the downsides to something that's more inspiring. And I've got a question from Genevieve M, who asks a historical question, and I think it's very relevant. So she asks, what inspired you to become so interested in transhumanism? Why are you putting so much of your personal energy behind transhumanism?
Well, I think everyone comes to transhumanism for a different reason. And I come to it, I guess historically speaking, both my parents were underneath the communist regime in Hungary. They escaped in the middle of the night. They, in fact, had to even leave my sister behind because they had to kind of escape legally across the border in Austria. So there's a sense of a revolutionary spirit perhaps built into the family. But it's also a spirit of wanting freedom and wanting to do what you want to do. And I was born in America, and I don't know however it happened, but at when I was in college, I started reading about transhumanism and cryonics, became fascinated with it. And science has always fascinated me. I was one of those kids when I was 6, 7 years old that played with science sets all day. But it really wasn't until my landmine incident in Vietnam, when I almost stepped on a landmine doing a story for the National Geographic Channel, that I kind of had an emotional switch and said, you know, I have been a transhumanist for 15 years, but I haven't done anything for the movement. I haven't actually put my heart and effort into moving it forward. But after I almost stepped on the landmine, I had this revelation that I need to now, this minute, motivate and do something for the movement. And you know, I began writing the book pretty soon afterwards, and that was my way of kind of writing a statement about how far one man would go to achieve indefinite lifespans and to create a transhumanist-minded world. Now, that book is crazy and pretty fun and pretty far out and very controversial, and I love it, but I realize it's a challenging philosophical book. But it also is a statement of myself, where these are the kind of philosophical premises that I have considered as I try to become someone who can actually help the movement along. Ultimately, I'm now interested in doing as much as I can to bring the movement to the mass, I suppose to the masses, to the public at large, so that when you talk to someone on the street, everyone says, oh, I know about that, and I embrace that, or I want that, or I don't want that, but they know about it, and we have a very conscious choice about some of the technologies that's coming in our life. And the reason I think that's very important, this is my main drive, is to popularize transhumanism. This is really what one of the main reasons I created the Transhumanist Party. As I said, I don't believe I'm going to win the presidency, but I do believe I can popularize transhumanism. And by doing so, we're going to get more and more people comfortable with it. And then when it comes to funding the projects that we need, people will be comfortable enough with it. And this is the key. This is the entire aim of what I'm trying to do, is that if people are comfortable with transhumanism, then the NIH and all the American funding will start funding these projects, saying, well, this is what the American people want. And once that happens, once we start putting real money into the science, we're going to see a J curve. You know, it's going to be stratospheric. It's just going to go right off the charts as technology, as embracing the technology, as the science starts becoming real. And very quickly, we'll find ourselves in a better world, less poverty, better health, longer lifespans, all these things because of technology and science. So it's really just a question of getting the culture and the country and all the other countries to say, you know what, we really do think science and technology, even radical science and technology, is in the best interest of the human species, even if it changes us a little bit. So that's kind of my main goal of what I'm trying to do with transhumanism. And I think the landmine incident in Vietnam was the one that cemented it to my head and said, hey, you almost died. Maybe it's time for you to do something now that you've been right to the edge.
Interesting the way you're talking about one thing can lead on to another. Once some news about transhumanism in media, then it can lead other people to comment on it, and it has a positive feedback cycle, provided things are right. Just the way that we talk about accelerating technology. Technology improves technology, which improves technology because there's more tools and more people and so forth. It can be the same with transhumanism, that if the conditions are right. And so I do share your view that there's a J curve potentially not far into the future, possibly in the next couple of years. Amon, I know you've been listening very carefully for the last 5-10 minutes. I'd like to feed you back in, and I'll toss you this question that Julian Snape has asked about the differences between a US Transhumanist Party manifesto and European ones. And are you feeling comfortable with what you're hearing described by Zoltan? Do you give it an enthusiastic 3 cheers, or would you want to spin things differently for a European audience?
So the things I've heard tonight, I'm very enthusiastic about. This sounds great. I completely agree with all of it. The kind of things I foresee as differences are more just subtle things, not even in some cases in policy, but sometimes about language. I think, say, when you talk about, well, you mentioned before the question about left or right and that kind of stuff, and I think sometimes you could say things in Europe about, say, universal basic income, for example. You could say things fairly bluntly without people saying, oh, you're trying to have a centralizing socialist controlling state or something. Whereas I think the Transhumanist Party in the US is going to have to tread a lot more carefully with that kind of thing. And that's just details in many ways. one thing I was going to say, because it's interesting while we're setting these parties up, what Zoltan was saying about ignoring a lot of the wee spats on Facebook, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been involved with a lot of those little arguments a lot over recent years, and these days what I'm trying to do is kind of step back and say, well, look, we're going to have a formal procedure for this, and so it's good to hash out the opinions, but you can't put too much weight on those conversations. And I think you're right, it's fascinating to look at the broader impact that things like your articles are having. But broadly speaking, I think the main difference between the US and Europe with the Transhumanist Party is that it's going to be easier to emphasize sort of a social element. I wouldn't go so far as to say socialist per se, because again, there's a lot of arguments to be had there, but explicitly saying having safety nets for members of the community and making sure that people, and one interesting topic is that people feel worried about whether or not they're going to have access to the technology. I mean, 20 years ago, transhumanists weren't too worried about that. Even 5 years ago, transhumanists weren't too worried about that. But nowadays, people are saying, well, hang on, we can see a lot of amazing technology starting to appear on the horizon. But clearly, a lot of people can't afford it. So when the really critical stuff comes along, how can we be sure that people are going to be able to afford it or at least have access to it? And I think some good lateral thinking about those kind of problems is the kind of thing that the Transhumanist Party could do well, whether it's to push these ideas ourselves, or as Zoltan was saying, to have the ear of establishment figures, you know, Hillary Clinton or anyone else, and say, well, okay, maybe you should think about it this way, and you know. But I think that's going to be the social factor is going to be the big difference there.
Well, let's follow on that discussion because there's a number of questions on the same and broad theme, which is how do we actually influence other political thinkers? And there's a question, for example, I think it's from Dean Joel, who's watching on YouTube, that has made its way through the system somehow. If you set up a transhumanist party, doesn't it make it more difficult to lobby other political parties about transhumanist issues? Isn't there a sort of competition there?
Well,
yeah. So that's for both of you. Why don't you chip in to both?
Well, I'll just say my bit. I think it's certainly a factor, and we've had discussions about it. And I think to a certain extent, anyone who's going to do lobbying, who's going to try to have a constructive relationship with established politicians and other organisations, they're going to have a little distance from the Transhumanist Party because, as has been pointed out by friends of ours who have political experience, they've said often politicians are going to be a little reticent about taking advice from anyone who's too closely identified with another party. So we're going to have people who just have that little bit of distance. They are sympathetic, they have the same goals as us, but they're coming at things from a different angle. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a party. I tend to think of it as sort of a pincer movement. We're coming at the same goal from two different directions.
So, Zoltan, if you could address that same question, but also looking at this, which is a point from Chris Montero, who says, do third parties in the US ever have any chance, given that the US political system is so stacked against independent parties because of the huge amount of funding that goes for the main two parties? And there's a question that somebody else has emailed me, which is, well, isn't the last example of a major independent candidate for the presidency, wasn't it counterproductive because it happened in the year 2000, and the person concerned, whose name may come back to me in a minute, took some votes away from Al Gore and arguably left George W. Bush with a clearer run at presidency, Ralph Nader. So that's one criticism. Somebody said we shouldn't be trying to do something separate. We should be working with the existing political parties rather than doing things. So is there any chance for a third party, Zoltan? And how are you really going to be able to influence parties if you have your own party?
Well, so those are all incredibly valid questions. So I think, for starters, the Transhumanist Party is way too small to even be compared to something like Ralph Nader, taking votes away or what. We're not in that league. We don't have nearly that kind of funding. we don't have nearly that kind of voter base. So we're not going to be taking votes away from anyone. If we get on a handful of state ballots before 2016, I will consider that an incredible accomplishment. So we're not actually a political danger to anyone. What we are is, and what I would encourage the other parties to do, is to become very media savvy, to become kind of these big giant media creation machines where we start pummeling the populace with radical technology and science ideas that get them to say, this is really cool stuff. And that's how we can influence the world, at least here for the next 2 to probably 6 years. I think what happens is there's a discrepancy. When I announce that I'm going to run for the presidency, everyone assumes like you'll be, right up there debating Hillary Clinton. But it's usually not like that. There are probably 50 other independent people running. And if I get in the top 10, I'll be quite happy with how everything ends up. But we have a good chance of potentially making as much news as the Libertarian Party, or even more. And that can spread. That can spread very quickly. It has been spreading. I'd say, in the last 2 weeks, every single day, we've had a write-up on the Transhumanist Party in some type of site or magazine. And just last night, we had one in one of Germany's largest magazines, in the Teleprost, which belongs to, I think, the Hesse.de. But anyways, it's a rated number 36 in Germany as far as sites go, top 5 news outlet. And this is the kind of impact that we can really have that's very positive. If we get to a point by 2024 where we are potentially taking votes with the candidate, that would be something to consider then. But in the meantime, I wouldn't see the Transhumanist Party as something that's dangerous for politics, but rather something that's unique enough to get conversations started and ask themselves, well, is this something that we should be incorporated into another party? And real quickly, a lot of people have asked, well, why don't you, join the Democratic or Republican Party and try to influence the people there? Well, I don't think that would work. I really think that those systems are so hierarchical. They're just kind of created full of bureaucracies. You could enter into it, but would you actually make any difference? Those parties have 200, 300-year long agendas. There's no changing the policy. What you need to do is to create something new, stick with it, and hope it makes an impact. And your way of succeeding is to hopefully impact some of the leading other politicians and get them to take your perspective and incorporate it into their own. And that's where I'm very hopeful that we can do that. I'm very hopeful that I will get the ear of some of the leading politicians in the country and at least have them consider some of the ideas, because certainly they're going to have to consider it. Transhumanism is kind of here to stay. In the next 10 years, everyone's going to be forced to deal with how we deal with AI. Everyone's going to be forced to deal with longevity as people live longer. Everyone's going to be forced to deal with some of the bionics and the chip implants and the mind uploading. These are very difficult bioethical questions, basically, and every government's going to have policies for it. So hopefully they'll reach out to us and find something unique to incorporate into their own agendas.
What do you think about space? And this is a question that Kenita Watson has asked. Should we transhumanists be talking a lot about the excitement and the vision of leaving the Earth behind with visionary projects into outer space? And this ties back, interestingly, to the last question, because there was another transhumanist politician, Gabriel Rothblatt, who did stand for a political seat, I think as the Democratic candidate for a seat in Florida, and he stood, amongst other things, on a pro-space agenda. He wasn't that far away from winning that vote, as I remember. So that might suggest there is possibilities to work inside the existing party. And he's identified as a transhumanist. He comes from a famous transhumanist party, a famous transhumanist family, rather. So two questions in one there. Would you work with Gabriel and others of his ilk inside the Democratic Party? And more generally, what do you think about tying our thoughts to space missions?
So you know, I think first off, Gabriel did an excellent job running and brought quite a bit of attention to it. But, you know, I think Gabriel's agenda was much more democratic based than, let's say, transhumanism based. And I don't think he would have, you know, probably done as well had he pushed for a real transhumanist agenda. I'm sure advisors advised against that, because that's not something that works in today's society yet. Maybe it will in 6 years. But he did a great job, and it's possible once you get in to try to make some changes from without. But you're only going to get into government if you have subscribed to a certain set of viewpoints and the voters put you in there for that. And then you sort of have to implement that. And if you don't implement that, you're going to get a lot of feedback that's negative. So, you know, that's part of why we're starting brand new and trying to come from the outside. Now, again, I definitely encourage other people to do what Gabriel did, which is to, if they have a party they like and they want to bring, you know, a techno-optimistic message to it, please do so, because that's critical. They might make amazing impacts later down the line. But, you know, the Transhumanist Party is really about establishing its own entity and being that bright star out there that people look to and that generates a lot of news in the media and say, well, what would the Transhumanist Party say about this? Because they're the ones who, this is their specialty. So, and then, you know, regarding space, I think space is not only fascinating, as you know, I've sailed all around, so I consider sailboats sort of like spaceships. At one day in the world, we'll have little yachts that float around up there, and you can go off and have incredible adventures. And I think that's just the most brilliant thing ever. If I had, you know, 10 lifetimes, I would certainly be dedicated to a few of them. So I love space. And I think from a transhumanist perspective and from a political perspective, it's a wonderful tool to use to promote, because few things are so grand in our imagination. And so I think it's very important that transhumanists push the space message, stand behind the new space industry, especially the private space industry, and try to encourage that and say, let's put more money and more funding into this, because this is exciting stuff. This represents the kind of the frontier of where human beings are. And it really looks good from a, you know, just speaking as a kind of a politician here, it really looks good from a media perspective. It's exciting. People want to see it. People want to think back and say, we want heroes that are astronauts and stuff like that. And so it's very important, I think, that the Transhumanist Party support the entire space industry and advocate for more of it and more I suppose, challenging missions that get us all looking to the stars. Because when you're looking to the stars, you're looking in the same direction the transhumanists are looking.
Great answer. So we're coming gradually towards the time, the end of the time allocated. We've got a few more minutes. I encourage audience members, if you want to apply a +1 to any of the questions you think particularly deserve to be covered in the next 10 50 minutes that's left, please do so. Find the Q&A app inside the Google Hangout system. You get to it from that 3x3 square near the top of your screen, and you can get into the Q&A. I'm going to generally be guided by the questions that have the most +1s, and so I'm going to pick a question next from William Bulk, who's been waiting very patiently. He asked a question about, are you familiar with the concept of a resource-based economy, RBE? This is a concept that's been popularized by, amongst others, the Venus Project and also the Zeitgeist movement. It's got a long history inside the original techno-progressive movement. So, and Zoltan, is this high up on your list of the things that you're considering to write about, or do you need to do some more research on that yet?
Oh, I definitely did need to do more research on this, but I can tell you that from what I've seen with the Zeitgeist and the Venus projects, I like it because it's something exciting and new. However, the project's been around a while, and I'm not sure they've gained enough traction in the broader public as something that could actually stick. And stick in the sense that, is it really worth for us to try to join forces with that, only to arrive at, you know, in 10 years' time at something that's small? You know, I'm with the Transhumanist Party and with transhumanism in general, I really am aiming for a transhumanist-minded world in 15 to 25 years. That's what I'd like to arrive at, where transhumanism is not just something that we speak about, you know, in social media, but it's something that a word is used in all the articles that come out. It's in all the history textbooks. It's no longer human. It's now this transhuman being, as far as the taxology and some of the terms go. I want transhumanism spread so broadly that it's impossible to go anywhere with it. You're going to see companies spring up with it in the name. You're going to see anything, big giant cruise ships incorporating the name into it. I'm talking about a world where everyone really is thinking radical technology and thinking radical science in their daily lives and saying this is great because we now have all the dreams we wanted, because we have conquered things like aging and death, and we have conquered a lot of the diseases, and we've just made it so that we can all live in this kind of utopic world that technology and science could bring us. So I'm not sure that the Venus or the Zeitgeist projects can reach that level of popularity given their framework right now. Now, again, I don't know enough about that, and I do love those projects. Got to be honest, every time I go on their sites, I'm fascinated. But I'm trying to do something that is going to hit the mainstream, and when it hits it, it'll be like the iPhone. It's like everyone wants it, and everyone wants to be a part of it, and everyone thinks in terms of, wow, this is a transhumanist world. What can we do next in this world? So that's my answer.
Amon, what questions would you like to ask Zoltan, given everything that we've been discussing for the last 50 minutes or so?
Right. Well, I guess I've just got one question really at this stage, and this is all very inspiring stuff. But I think it's automatically it's going to get tricky once we get into some of the details. And I guess I'm going to ask the boring question. I'm sorry to say, but just how do you expect to, well, over what time frame do you think you're going to set up bodies and so on so that people can get involved and help develop the direction of the party beyond your personal views? Because I mean, at the moment it's you've got great vision and you distill things and I think at this stage that's exactly what's needed. But I'm curious, at some point other people are going to want to have a say, and if you've got any ideas how you're going to handle that transition.
So, I'm glad you asked me these questions, because I think I wanted to use this opportunity to address some of the more difficult positions. Obviously, I have taken it upon myself to form the party, and some people didn't like that. And, the only thing I can say, I think, to people that are not sure about the US Transhumanist Party is that if they're not sure they like it, they're always welcome to start another United States Transhumanist Party. There's lots of names out there that they could use that are similar and stuff like that. I am personally interested in spreading transhumanism as quickly as possible, and I am personally interested in creating a framework in the United States that will allow a huge amount more of resources to go into the life extension field. When I say I don't want to die, I mean it. That's my goal here. That's why I'm doing everything that I'm doing. And I'm not interested in politics when it comes to trying to stop death. I'm interested in trying to stop death as quickly and as effectively as possible. So it's part of the reason why I've created the party I have, which is, where obviously there was a nomination for the presidential candidacy that was just done by officers instead of a national caucus and all these other things, which has upset quite a few people. But the ultimate thing behind this is that you can't do this without a personality or without somebody who's in the media and able to get the word out. It requires, in order for us to have had 100 articles written about us, about what we're at now, over the last 4 months, it requires this type of action. This, I love it that you guys wrote a manifesto and all these other things, because we're going to, I think, first off, I thought the UK manifesto was really good, and I thought we're going to borrow heavily from it, probably, maybe even entirely. But as you know, I haven't bothered to write a manifesto yet. I didn't think that the Transhumanist Party, actually, the U.S. Transhumanist Party, wanted to get kind of stuck with a set ideology yet, because it is kind of confining. What we really needed was just a huge push in the media, getting excitement, getting people talking, having events, talking about bus tours, and we have a couple of really crazy things planned that will get people excited. Again, we're not planning on winning, and Amon, it's very possible that after 2016, we'll try to enlarge the Transhumanist Party so that a lot more voices would be able to be heard. But in the meantime,
Zoltan. I think Zoltan's cut off.
Say it again. You got it?
I thought we lost you for a few minutes, but you're back again.
So just continuing that, we don't have much funding. We're pretty kind of bone thin when it comes to resources and stuff like that. And we're just trying to get out the message as quickly as possible about some of those things. This requires, at times, something that's not structured like a normal political party would be, because we've just started. But I do imagine by the time we get to 2016 and after this entire campaign, we will hopefully have thousands and thousands more members, and people will want to start doing things. But I did, for example, yesterday I finally put up a few of the volunteer positions, and we are starting to incorporate people more. We're trying to work on the awful website we have, and we're trying to take in other types of perspectives. I'm working with a few university students trying to gather signatures, so we're starting to grow, but it's very difficult without funding, and it's very difficult to maintain the media coverage that I think is imperative to the party in order to get a very small group of people like we are right now to grow. So I know there's been some criticism on how I did the party, but I hope the actual results will stand for themselves, and I'm hoping that by the time 2016 comes, people will say, well, wow, this is it really has worked in terms of getting the message across. And and I've also made a real push to be centric, so that I could have said as little people as possible about how I was doing things. The reality is that I'm in a special position because I'm so involved with the media, and that takes a lot of not only discipline, but it takes a lot of decision making on how to push the movement forward without upsetting a lot of people, because ultimately it's going in the direction that I'm sort of pushing. So I'm trying my best to not step on people's toes, but I'm also trying my best to accomplish spreading transhumanism as quickly as possible, which was, I felt, my ultimate goal, and also probably the ultimate goal of most people in our community.
Can I just offer a comment there? Just my 2 cents worth. I think you're doing, for my part, I think you're doing exactly the right thing. You're right, it's going to upset a lot of people, has upset people, I'm sure. But I think the fact that you're saying, okay, let's get to 2016, the main aim is to get publicity out there, and after that point, we'll think about working out the details of a fully fledged party. But for now, what the party needs is unity and a strong vision. And so I think as long as you've laid out the point where you say, okay, after 2016, then things can open up a bit. I wouldn't disagree. I think it's a great thing. The other thought there was just the manifesto. That was something that came up from, that was David's initiative, but people came together and added their thoughts from different directions. And the way I've thought of it was that this is very much a grassroots kind of effort. And so the different parties and the different groups within parties over time, they should be encouraged to cooperate and borrow. So when something works, we shouldn't be all precious and say, oh, well, this is our policy or whatever. I think we should be supporting each other whenever we can. Anyway, just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Amon. Zoltan, so if people have been listening to this and they said, I want to help this guy, he's got the vision that I like, if that's what people are thinking, what should they be doing next? How can they participate?
So, and I hate to say this, but so first off, Amon, thanks for saying the things you said. Yes, and I agree with that all. And I'm really actually stoked you guys did the manifesto, because it reads brilliant, and really it takes a huge amount of work. That's part of the reason I have not been able to do it. It takes me two weeks of work to come up with that, and so I'm excited that has happened. But what can people do? I got to be honest with you right now. If people want to do anything, they can make donations, because we basically you know, I'm a normal person. I have a family. I have kids, and I am financially supporting the party right now. Essentially, there's infrastructure, there's telephone lines, there's internet, there's all these things, and I've been having to go all over. We met with the BBC the other day, but I had to drive 2 hours for it. You know, so it would be great to have some resources come in where that I could hire some of the things out. For example, web design, instead of me doing it, who's no designer at all, and everyone's complaining. You know, it's getting that we have this website that's quite awful looking, and it's getting, you know, a million hits last month, or maybe 2 million. So it's a very challenging thing, because we had a huge amount of coverage. So it'd be great with donations we can hire out some of these things, and eventually, for example, getting signatures. These are things that matter. But I did put up 3 volunteer positions yesterday on the website. We're finally at that moment where I'm able to take that, and you know, and I have to email people and work on the kind of content that we're going to be doing. But those are things people can do, and basically they can just reach out, and anytime they reach out, I'll answer back. I always answer everyone, and I'll try to give my best piece for what people can do. But in the future, we're going to certainly have events, Kickstarters. We have a documentary planned. We're going to we want to do a bus campaign tour. I'm already looking into it, and I have a couple TV shows interested in kind of this crazy bus campaign. So this will, in the summer, this will be great. And people can help with that, because it's going to require volunteer positions. And it'll probably be fun. Probably people can come for a week or something like that. So it's all about reaching out and trying to, you know, offer me your, I guess, resume or expertise and what can be used in the way that's helpful. We are basically brand new, and we only have a few people involved, and I'm spending, you know, full time trying to promote this. So anyone anyone that can offer their help is going to probably be, you know, welcomed and given an assignment that can hopefully make this grow bigger, and more people be involved. And eventually, if we can get the grassroots side of it to take off, and I'm a complete grassroots type of guy, I think that's perfect, then we might actually get it so that we have signatures all over the place, banners all over the place, bumper stickers, T-shirts. I mean, I already got all this stuff. So it's a matter of just getting it out there and starting to implement this policy and hoping it goes viral.
Great. And what are the 3 volunteer positions, if you can remember them, that you're most looking for?
Sure. Well, you know, we actually have 4 or 5 at the moment, but 2 are already taken. We're trying to get someone to work on our website. We're trying to get someone to redesign our social media so we have something that's colorful. I already like what you guys have done in your Facebook groups, so we're trying to kind of come up with something similar. We're trying to form a subreddit group. I think we should do a subreddit group for all the transhumanist parties. And I think, but I have some specific requirements for that, because I would like to make sure it's not a part of any other subreddit. You know, the Futurology Party, for example, already has a futurist party. So we don't want to be a part of the subreddit. You know, our transhumanist party doesn't want to be part of another group that might have some type of antagonistic feeling. So, you know, I'm trying to find some administrators that would do that. And I'm also trying to find some administrators for the Wikipedia. We had an existing Wikipedia page for the Transhumanist Party. We have plenty enough articles. Don't mind combining it with all the international parties. But some of the administrators and some of the haters, frankly, took it down. And now it's part of my Wikipedia page. But I think it should be a standalone page. And we've had major articles since, secondary, you know, articles that support there being a page. But this requires someone who has an existing Wikipedia account and an existing maybe an administrator, someone who can actually stand up to some of the long-standing people there and say, well, this makes sense. Because a lot of the help that we tried to get when we tried to keep the page up, we were just newbies on Wikipedia, and you don't carry much credit. So, you know, these are some of the positions we're trying to fill as part of a broad overall social media platform. And hopefully over the next month, as we get all these things set up, we'll be in that position to really start, you know, hitting the populace and saying, well, go here if you want to do that, or join us social media, or do this, or make a donation, or volunteer here. And eventually there'll be a trickle-down effect. And I think within 6 months, especially if the media coverage continues, we could see the name Transhumanist Party for internationally, for everyone, grow dramatically and become a novelty, become something that media wants to cover, because it's always interesting to hear, you know, what the futurist perspective is.
Well, that's a very interesting vision, and I think it's a great deal that we can look forward to. I'm going to wind this call up. I'm going to give both of you a chance to have a final 60 seconds of anything that you didn't manage to say that you think should be said. Let's start with Amon, and then we'll come back to Zoltan for the final words.
Okay, I suppose the only thing I didn't comment on that maybe I'd have liked to was just very briefly the resource-based economy thing. I guess what I was thinking is that Zoltan was saying things about, about how these kind of ideas are going to become possibly more mainstream, more important. When we know a lot of things about accelerating developments and trends, and I think the world is going to become a crazily different place in both good ways and bad ways soon. So I think the Transhumanist Party is going to become more and more relevant. So history is on our side in that respect. So we're kind of just trying to meet that development halfway. So I think things like a resource-based economy, they sound like crazy utopian dreams now, but I think things that sound radical now are going to start to sound more and more plausible, or at least, worth talking about as we go on. So I would hope that Transhumanist Party policies and ideas would get us halfway, kind of look at things as a transition, try to get us in a position where we could start to really consider the more outlandish ideas. I mean, I'm with caveats. I'm quite keen on the ideas of a resource-based economy. I'm a member of the Zeitgeist movement, among other things. So I like those ideas. But just to sign off, I would just say that I found this really encouraging. I'm really excited. I mean, I have been for a while now, but I've liked what I've heard. But I'd just like to say that it's early days for all of us, but anything we can do on this side of the pond to help, I think we definitely want to. I think I can say that much for sure without consulting with the team. But I wish you all the best.
Zoltan, final words.
Well, thank you, Amon, for some of those thoughts, and I agree. If there's anything I can do to help you and transhumanist parties in Europe, I would like to do that, and I certainly will be writing about all the parties shortly. And one thing I want to encourage everyone is that if anyone's listening, I've heard that there's potentially a Canadian transhumanist party, there's potentially a Brazilian transhumanist party, and maybe one in Australia. I would definitely encourage everyone to take the same transhumanist party, whatever it is, whatever country, stick with the words and develop it, even if it's small, because the more that exists, the better chance we have of succeeding, because people will look around and say, well, look, they're on every single continent. So certainly I encourage everyone, even if it's just a 5-person party, to develop a transhumanist political party in their nation and to work towards that. And I just want to end by saying, if you want to help the United States Transhumanist Party, definitely go to our website, transhumanistparty.org, and email me, connect with us in social media, and I'll hopefully have more for people to be doing here over the next few weeks. Literally, I'm working on this every day, 7 days a week, so every single day is a step in the right direction as we develop infrastructure and get a real platform going. And I'm very hopeful that we will reach some of the goals we set out, which is just to expand transhumanism and really get it into the public mindset. There's a realistic chance that within 5 or 10 years, the Transhumanist Party, no matter where it is, will be a very well-known entity, and that is indeed a big success. So I think I appreciate you guys having me on the show. I love the conversation. I'm very encouraged by it, and I hope that here's to the future. Let's hope that we can all take our respective parties and grow them and get members and get people that are interested, and we can change the world.
Excellent. And if people look briefly at the transhumanistparty.eu site, you'll see there's already parties with various stages of formation from Austria, Italy, Romania, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey, the UK, and beyond Europe, USA, Australia, virtual. Canada's not on there yet. Probably there's several others we haven't got on there yet. Please get in touch with us if you would like to join this. And also, I have to say, if any of you are listening and you say you would like to be a panelist on a future one of these hangouts, if you have views on transhumanism and politics, if you have a particular policy area that you think ought to be covered and you think you are an expert in that area, or you have strong views which you think should be covered, then please let us know, because we need to draw on the best insights from all the people from the transhumanist community. And that way we can really make a big impact in this world. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks especially to Amon, and thanks even more especially to Zoltan, because I know both of you are in various ways suffering from your humanity minus bodies at this moment, before we've got all the healthcare sorted out. So you've both been soldiers, and I look forward to talking to both of you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.